What is going on, my Atomic Autowork friends? So today we're going to be working on a Honda Shadow custom seat. This is for a returning longtime customer. We've done many seats for him. We actually just did a seat on his other Honda Shadow. It was a black seat with purple diamond stitch. I'll put a link somewhere up there so you could see it if you want to see that video. This one, this bike is like totally custom. We did the seat a long time ago for him, and it was kind of a funny story because he came in with his trench coat and he's like, I want to wrap my seat in my trench coat. And I was like, who wears trench coats, Jose? And I'm like, was this like the trench coat that you got on your first date with? And he's like, well, yeah. So now we made a seat out of that. So we're redoing it. He wants it white, and we're doing a light blue stitch. I think we're doing diamonds. Let me just look at the paperwork here. So Bill, you ready to work on the trench coat seat?
Oh, I get the trench coat seat.
Yes. So let me show you what we're gonna do. Here is the trench coat seat, right?
Oh my goodness.
So we have to take that off because the trench coat didn't last well. And then we are going to shave the front of it. If you look up here where it's rubbing, we want to cut this back 1/4 of an inch in. So it's not rubbing on his tank anymore.
It's not rubbing on the tank.
And then we are going to pattern it out. And we are going to, I was not videotaping your face, just your thumbs, Fonzie. And then I'm gonna actually call or text him really quick because it doesn't say what pattern. He just says we're using the light blue thread and white. So it's gonna be very clean and elegant looking, very pimped out. The leather's not holding up too well, is it? The whole upstairs smells like burnt leather.
The trench coat guy wore a lot of cologne. I'm smelling a lot of.
Can you smell it? It's better than the urine guy.
Better than the urine guy.
So now we have Bill over here. He's about 7 hours in on taking the seat apart.
Taping. Oh my God.
So he's taping this one, and normally when you watch us tape these, we only do one side, but because the seat's not really symmetrical, he's taping the full seat off, and we're gonna make a pattern off of that.
Yeah, it's a small seat, but it has a lot of contours to it. So taping this one's a little bit tricky because we want to make sure that we get the tape in all of those contours. So we have to cut the tape up and make it, fit in all of those nice contours in order to get a nice pattern when we take it off.
So Jose just texted me back and said we're doing white imitation leather with the blue stitch. We're doing horizontal pleat, so it's gonna be like a traditional looking seat. Bill started patterning all of our lines out for us. We are going to finish these up and go through and sew them. We're gonna be using 1/2 inch sew foam on this one. We've been using a lot of 1/4 inch sew foam. It does look really nice and tight when you do your stitch work. However, when you want like that old school roll and tuck pleat, this will give us that. And we're gonna use the blue thread. It's a top stitch. It's different than a real traditional roll and pleat. On a real traditional roll and pleat, there's a couple ways to do it. Sometimes you cut your strips into individual pieces and then you would overlap each one and sew it. Usually on the older stuff, what you would do is you'd have your sew foam or your bottom material, because they didn't really use sew foam back then. They would use like a cotton foam with like a scrim backing on it, and they put that material underneath it, or even a muslin material underneath it so that you could stitch through it and grab that. And what they would do is they would have that whole foam here. You would take your piece, flap it back here, make sure you have your edge here. You would stitch down it, then you would fold this back, go to the next one, fold this one over, stitch on it, go to the next one, and do that. And then what you do is you get this tuck and roll look, and you don't see the stitches, and it's a nice look. Modern stuff now, because people want to see that thread, they want to see the vibrance of the thread and bring that color out. We end up doing the similar thing, but we actually put our pleats on top so you could actually see the stitch. Very common. We do that a lot. And some of the old school Bates style seats we'll do because people want that vintage look, and that's the only way to get it. But this is kind of cool, and that's what we're doing. So with this here, what I'm doing is I'm putting the pleats at 1.25 inches. You'll see that we're making this panel a lot bigger, because what happens is, especially when using 1/2 inch sew foam, if you use 1/4 inch sew foam, this doesn't really happen. And it kind of has a lot of benefits to using the 1/4 inch sew foam, because you could put your pattern on there, and then when you stop your stitching, you could actually run around that pattern. You know exactly where the end's gonna be. You don't have to worry about cutting your thread. We've noticed with especially with the heavier 210 threads, like the Ceraphil threads that we use, when you cut the edge, you gotta really be careful, because if you cut a thread and pull it tight, that big thread's gonna pop through and look like heck. So what we do is we're gonna put the 1/2 inch sew foam on this, we're gonna pull our pleats. This panel's gonna shrink down a lot. Then we're gonna drop our pattern onto that, trace it out, and that'll be the pattern. If you were to try it without that, if you were to put this pattern on it, put your pleats in it and sew it, your pattern is going to probably be a 1/2 inch or more smaller than it needs to be. And the more pleats you put on, the more it shrinks. You do like diamonds and it shrinks both ways. So this will shrink this way, but it's not going to shrink that way. Tell you what, this is even cleaner and better looking than I thought. That blue and that white together, it looks nice. Can't wait to see it on his bike. His bike's kind of like this bluish color. I just pinned this seat up, or the seat cover onto the seat. So what I'm gonna do now is pull it around the edges, mark the edges, trim those, and we're gonna make a cover for the bottom of the seat so it looks nice and professional. Okay, so the cover's all sewn up and we are gonna go install it. One thing I forgot to mention, when you're doing smaller seats, what's really concerning is they are smaller, so they seem like less work, but they're also a smaller thing to look at, so people look more at the details of them. So you really want to make sure all the little details are perfect and everything's tight and crisp and no wrinkles and stitching looks nice. Like a lot of these, actually I'll show you. We were just talking about how when you're doing your pleats and they have to end in the front, you want them to end in the same place. So you want to make sure you have just enough stitching around as you stitch around it, and it's tough, especially when they're not really symmetrical on both sides, so then you have to kind of make it look good when it's actually not really the same. Here's the seat all done. You know what, we keep getting a lot of questions on YouTube about fastening the seats and mounting the seats, and actually I just had a message come in from Michael. Thank you, Michael. And he's actually doing a fiberglass pan, so I figured since this is a fiberglass pan, we'll kind of go over. Anyway, so this is a fiberglass pan, and the difference is there's like many ways to mount it. If you're using a plastic pan, you could staple to a plastic pan. Fiberglass pans, you don't staple to. He had the similar problem where he wasn't sure how to mount it, and they told him he thought he was gonna use staples, and someone showed him that you can't use staples. On a lot of these seats, we actually just use adhesive. Mechanical fasteners are the best way. They're, super secure. You don't have to worry about anything coming through, but the problem is if it's a molded seat pan that's formed right to the fender like this one is, if you put anything metal in there, it's going to scratch your tank or your rear fender or your frame. So even when you put like a felt liner on it or a suede, it's going to wear through and it's going to mess up your fender. You really need it smooth. So you can recess rivets in there. Like sometimes we'll take 1/8 inch rivets, we'll recess them into the fiberglass, put those in there. This way it doesn't pop out that much. But it also depends on the price of your seat and what you're going for. If you're doing a high-end bike, then you do something like that. You want to make sure everything's mechanically fastened, you want everything recessed, but that takes a lot of time to do it. A lot of the time on the lower end seats that you're not spending a big, huge amount of money on, you'll actually just use an adhesive. 99.999% of the time, the adhesive works fine and you don't have an issue with it. So with this one, we actually just glued it because it's such a tight finish. And then we went and just put a felt on the bottom. Sometimes we'll do the suedes on there because it's thinner, but it really depends on how close to the frame and seat pan it is. Sometimes you'll have a seat that arches up in the back and up like in a drop seat chopper. Those ones there, when you make your seat pan, you want to really make sure they're smaller and higher because there's a lot of material that goes in there. If you picture this going on a bike and it's too thick in the back, it's going to come down and forward. Whereas if you're doing a drop seat that's like this, you can't go forward or backwards. So if you make it too small, when you put on your material, it's not going to slide in. It's just going to bend the seat up and it's a whole mess. So hopefully that helps out. Also, if it's a steel pan, you could rivet to a steel pan. That's most of the time what they do, or you glue to the steel pan, the same thing. So every application has a different scenario. If you're doing more of a factory seat pan where you have a gap and there's no tolerance, or you have a lot of tolerance, like you have that much play in it, you could actually sew the bottom of the material really nice. Like we'll do sometimes top stitching and things like that on there, but you could actually do a stitch on the bottom of the material and pull that down, you rivet it nice, and you don't have to worry about it hitting the frame. That's why a lot of the seat manufacturers do that, because with those gaps and those little rubber bumpers, your seat pan never really sits on the seat, so they don't have to worry about that. With us, the problem is our guys that are building custom bikes want a really tight fitting seat pan that has no gaps on it. They want it to hug the fender and look like it was born there. A lot of times when we're modifying seats for real tall riders, it needs to go back so far that by not having or by having a big gap on there, it's going to push you forward, so we need to eliminate that. So there's a lot of different scenarios to do that. But Michael, for your seat, I would just glue it on there with a upholstery grade adhesive. There are some really top end ones that'll work. You're not going to find them anywhere. If you go to like Home Depot or Lowe's and you get their contact adhesive, it'll stick a little bit, but it's probably going to peel off. If it gets hot, it'll probably reactivate and loosen up there. If it's clean fiberglass to your seat pan, believe it or not, super glue, like regular super glue, crazy glue rather, not super glue, crazy glue works really great with a lot of materials. Some materials like leathers and stuff, you could bond the crazy glue or bond the leather to the fiberglass pan with crazy glue, and when you go to get it off, you'll actually shred it into pieces because it will glue that much. So it really depends on your material. You're gonna have to test it out and see what it is. If you know what your material is, you can shoot us an email and I'll give you some more advice on what you could do to fasten that on there. Anyway, I hope you guys like Jose's seat. I hope Jose likes it. I'm gonna let him know, send him a picture, and hopefully he digs it, and maybe he'll actually ride the bike in so you can see it. I know we had some videos years ago with his bike on it, and but with the Trenchcoat seat, and I'd like to see it now with this because it's gonna look clean, bright, kind of like 50s looking, but retro. Okay, so check this out. This is Jose's bike. We did a video with the seat, but we didn't have the bike here. And now you can see what it looks like on the bike, which hopefully you can see. Look at that purple matches the flames like so nice. And then Jose has his new seat. What do you think your new seat?
Ta-da! I can't wait to plant my ass on my new seat. This thing is gonna look so bitchin' on my bike, and I'm gonna bring it by so you get a video of that. That seat is so comfy. Eddie, 2 seats. Knock them out of the fucking park.
Nice, nice. Like, share, subscribe, please. Follow, tell a friend.